Welcome to this week's Two Men in the Middle. This is where two men in the middle of the country get together and talk about politics, current events, and other fun stuff. I'm Craig Huey.
I'm Brandon Koenig.
Well, Brandon, anything happened this week? Anything worth talking about? Has your news feed been filled with
a tiny
anything?
news story? Yeah, the FBI raiding Mar-a-Lago, just a blip on the radar.
So it would almost be to find a starting point on this story is difficult. And we can go through the chronology and all of that of where we stand right now here on Sunday afternoon. But just having a couple days to digest all of this, just what sticks out of your mind as kind of the top line story of this entire chapter of the Trump saga, the raid on Mar-a-Lago?
The complete overreaction and hyperventilating by the right in response to this, by Fox News, by OAN, by Newsmax, a lot of the right-wing commentators on talk radio and on in podcasts, they did not even wait to see all the facts. And this was before we even knew what the FBI was looking for, how they had been tipped off, what had been seized. All we knew is that there was a raid. FBI went in to retrieve classified documents that they were led to believe that the president had. And the reaction to that was just, it was unhinged and insane. Yeah. Basically, that this was the worst thing that has ever happened in the history of our republic. That was one of the things mentioned, that all of a sudden you have calls now for the FBI to be defunded or destroyed, dismantled. The fact that somehow this makes us a banana republic and that we're comparing ourselves now to third world countries and failed nation states because we're, basically holding our elected leaders and formerly elected leaders accountable, which, by the way, those states don't do. They do the opposite. Their leaders get immunity from being prosecuted for crimes. So that didn't make sense. And I feel like it's like upside down world. I mean, it's like everything is the opposite of what they're saying.
Yeah.
In terms of the claims that are being made. Another one is that, imagine if this could happen to the president of the United States, this could happen to you or any ordinary American citizen. It's like, hello, this happens to ordinary American citizens every single day of the week.
All the time.
There are search warrants. And, again, the conspiracies are running wild that, this was something that Biden set into motion. It's connected to the IRS agents, the hiring of the claim of 87,000, which we can get into, which is also incorrect. But the fact of the matter is that they conveniently ignored the fact that when anybody, but particularly the FBI, gets a search warrant in these circumstances, those have to be signed off by a federal judge, and there has to be probable cause for that to occur. So those are the checks that you have in this process. It's not like the FBI just went in on a whim. Yeah. And that gets into some other issues. I know we'll talk about this, but this rhetoric has consequences. The judge in this case, his information had to be scrapped from the website online for the court because he was getting doxxed and because there were all these death threats against him. We actually had an attack against an FBI field office in Cincinnati as a direct result of the rhetoric on this issue. And so it's a reminder that lives are at stake, and there's so many crazy people out there and diehard loyalists that, again, all they need is that spark to be ignited, and they will run with it.
It was the immediacy of that leap to, we now live in a tyrannical state. We now are, the DOJ has become the Gestapo. The FBI is the KGB. It's like everybody immediately, as soon as this news hit, there was no examination of, let's talk about the, 3 active criminal investigations that Donald Trump is under right now. The any number of things that he did as president that may have spawned this type of activity. It's immediately like, this is totally unlawful. This is what happens in a banana republic. This basically shows somehow that every possible critique we've made over the FBI and the DOJ in the last 6 years was on point, justified, and this is the end of a democracy. And I sat there watching it thinking, maybe I'm missing something here. And one of the things I wrote down that's been hard to kind of gauge through this entire process this week with this news is the reaction from the right is so far away from like my reaction and what I would call like a normal reaction. It's hard to gauge. Brandon, am I missing something? Is there something in this? Because we've spent the last couple of weeks debating how far should the DOJ go with Trump. I think you've been more comfortable going a little bit farther and faster. I've been a little more comfortable with pumping the brakes and taking a more deliberate approach. Well, it's all moot now because it's a ball rolling downhill at this point. The seal's been cracked. We're on our way.
So we've seen how the reaction is to a search warrant being executed. So you can imagine how it would be if he's actually indicted or let alone found guilty. But at the same time, I know that many of these people, especially the talking heads, they know better that this is intentional to inflame and to have this overzealous reaction to be able so that they can intimidate and it's a form of intimidation and I don't think it's going to ultimately work, but the idea is to get the FBI and the DOJ to back off and say, oh, look at what we can do. This is only the tip of the iceberg.
And Britton, what is, I'm still having a hard time figuring out what is at the core of all of this rage on the right. We'll call it the right media wing of the Republican Party. It feels like this is still about Hillary Clinton and that the Republicans feel that she got a complete pass on what she did in 2016 with mishandling sensitive information, and that Comey and the FBI and the DOJ completely walked away from and completely gave her a pass on something that they thought was clearly should be punishable. Is that's the best thing that I can come up with, because the basis of this being unfair is that they'll start citing all these examples. Hillary's emails. There was a dude for the Clinton administration who walked in the archives, stuffed a bunch of papers in his pants, walked out.
Sandy Berger,
he got arrested. Petraeus, he got a misdemeanor, I think, conviction when he didn't handle some documents correctly. So the point that they're making, from what I can piece together, is if you look historically at the people that have been accused or found guilty of mishandling docs, it has never been escalated to this level. And the thing that I think people need to keep in mind is let's contrast Hillary Clinton with Donald Trump and how the DOJ approached each one of these situations.
Yes.
The main point here of difference and where these two paths diverge, the FBI subpoenaed her email server. She gave them the server.
Right. They did not have to execute a search warrant.
That's right.
Yeah.
When they gave Trump the subpoena June 3rd for the papers, he didn't give it to him. That's where now you're on a completely different path than what was happening with Hillary and other folks who have been in this same kind of mess.
And so that's where you refute claim number one, which is they should have just asked him and he would have handed this over. You go back to January when they did this, as you said, because the subpoenas actually go back further this year, and they were not given all the information they asked for. And so that's why we're at where we are today, because it was a refusal to comply with a subpoena request.
So the first freak out is by the right of, oh my God, this is unprecedented. This is a sign that Joe Biden is officially and Merrick Garland are after Trump. And that has this 24-ish, 48-ish hour cycle. Garland comes out and basically says, hey, I signed off on this. This was on me. Stop threatening the agents. Then he does leak to the Washington Post that this is about nuclear documents. This is where the story takes another bend and another turn.
Yeah.
I have multiple people who have texted me outlandish fantasies about what type of nuclear information Trump could have. And I want to run a few of these past you, and you tell me if these make sense.
Okay.
Why would anybody steal the plans for a nuclear bomb? Nuclear bombs are, 85 years old? If you can get the uranium, they're pretty easy to make.
Right.
Do you think this is Trump has a blueprint to a bomb or a missile that he smuggled out of the White House?
No, and I think it's definitely easy to focus on that because I think that's a worst case scenario that people's minds gravitate to.
It's the most Hollywood case that we've all seen played out in a film.
But I mean, and so the fact of the matter is that you could have documents that describe either nuclear capabilities or highlight them to some degree that are not, the details of actually how to create or to execute a nuclear weapon. But I think what's most intriguing here is because we're able to see the details now of, I should say we're able to see what was seized, right, in the classification level. So some of this had top secret classification and then the classification that's even above top secret. Yeah. That's what's most interesting to me. Regardless of what it is, the fact that we're dealing with classification levels that are that severe. Like, I mean, we're talking
Sure.
about the upper echelon of how things are classified, regardless of what it is. Like, it's important and it's critical that they get this back, because in the wrong hands, that could be really detrimental. And so I'm more interested in the notion, or fascinated with the idea, is why did Trump take these in the first place? What was his motivation? And there's a number of things. It could be that he's delusional enough to think that he still is the president and will be in the White House again fairly soon. So this is his way of being able to assert control and being able to, because there's been little ways that he's done that throughout. If you notice, his loyalists still refer to him as President Trump. They never say former president. There's this idea that you have to refer to him as president, which really kind of ticked me off when they said this has never happened to the president before. And I want to say he's not the president anymore. He's a private citizen. He's a former president. And then there's the fact that he has actually been noted for, he continues in breach of ethics conduct to still utilize the presidential seal. On his stationery, everything. You're not supposed to when you're no longer the president. You're not supposed to go around and have it on your podiums. He's the first person in living history that has done that and continues to do that. So there's this delusional mindset that maybe it's a way of asserting just in those other ways that he's still president. But then my mind also goes to the fact is, could this be leverage with foreign powers or even non-state actors, in terms of financial quid pro quo?
Why would the Saudis need to buy a plan for a missile or a weapon? They just buy the weapon.
Right.
They have all of the money. If they truly wanted this technology, they would just buy a company or a college or people, and they would get this technology.
Right, and that's why I don't think it's the plan. But if there's intelligence information of any kind that's significant, like, that's where, and not necessarily about nuclear weapons themselves, but about, our capabilities or where we store them, or, any number of things, that's information that can be leveraged in some way.
What these documents are matter a lot, I think, in the court of public opinion. What they are, what they pertain to, I think is going to make a huge difference on how far any law enforcement entity feels pushing this case forward. Because if these are highly sensitive documents that the American people would recognize are highly sensitive, past their classification, I think you have a case. If these are documents that the what isn't that impactive, I think a lot of that falls away. I know that's not right, and the classification of the docs really has nothing to do with, for example, did he violate the Espionage Act or not?
Right.
But just for a matter of practicality moving forward, if these are not docs that shock the American people that he would have and refuse to give back, then this isn't viable moving forward. But you've accomplished what you want to do, and that's it.
But how are we ever to know what is actually in those docs? We won't. Why
do we need to know? If they're that top secret, I've resigned myself to. Yeah. We're not going to know what
we're not going to know. But again, I think that's part of the case is having to make that, because we're never going to know the details of exactly what's in it.
Yeah.
And so there's still the argument to be made that the part of the reason we can't know what's in it is because this is highly classified, the top secret, most secure information possible. Highest classification level possible in terms of some of these boxes.
And that was what Hillary had on her email server, too. She
Right.
had the same classification of docs as Trump did. Once you get past the what, and I think the what matters a lot, then there's the why, like you said.
Yeah.
Why did he do this? He could just be completely delusional. If I had to guess, it would be he still thinks he's president. Like you said, he likes some of these docs. He's cool. He likes to show them around. It just makes him feel important having these docs. It could be that simple of why he has them. I don't think there's a plot to sell nuclear secrets to the Saudis that Trump is facilitating through these documents.
Well, no, but again, I would have put it past him to keep on to it or retain it as collateral for future types of kind of business trading, and more so in the realm of business, because he has many outstanding loans. He has debts that need to be paid off, and it could be something of a classification level that doesn't necessarily relate to nuclear, but has high classification level because of it being sensitive intel that he could be willing to trade or sell for whatever purpose, to help himself financially.
I think it's much, much, much more probable that Trump knows the docs are cool. People will be impressed by him, and he whips them around at Mar-a-Lago during cocktail parties to look awesome.
But you can't do that. I
get that, but both are illegal.
Right.
But one is a massive international plot with Trump as a James Bond villain, and one is Trump as an idiot. I will always defer to Trump's just an idiot. He's a 12-year-old boy who found some cool things that he shows around at parties at his house, I believe, is probably what he's doing.
Well, we have plenty of evidence during his presidency to point to that. Look at how much time he spent on redesigning Air Force One and the color scheme, and he would get stuck in these nuanced details of anything to make himself look bigger or better.
We've seen Trump at his James Bond villainous most. That's the 2020 election.
Right.
There was no sophisticated plot. That was all blunt force trauma with two morons, with Giuliani and that other chick, Powell, leading the pack. Trump has never showed this level of sophistication in anything he's ever done.
You had others, I think, behind the scenes that had more sophistication, like John Eastman, who were really looking at playing the game, the gamesmanship of really trying to look at how to make the pieces fall with the Electoral College. But yeah, Trump himself isn't that savvy.
No.
I mean, he relies on other people and executing anything that's going to keep him in power.
And it seemed like on Thursday, somewhere this week, later in the week, it turned to, okay, we're not framing this anymore in the media on the Republican side as a threat to democracy. We have a certain crowd that's just going to keep banging that drum. Then it came into, well, this isn't really bad. This is what always happens with Trump. The Republicans pivot to, he probably did it, or he did something close to what people are saying. And yes, it's bad, but it's not that bad. And we can make up any number of excuses to why he did it, or point to dozens of people on the other side that have done the exact same thing. So it seems like everybody just punted back to the comfortable position. Okay, if Trump did have those docs, he magically blessed them and declassified them. That's one thing.
Which you can't do.
So
but yeah.
We're right back to where we've always been with Trump. Everybody kind of agrees, even the Republicans believe that he probably did something wrong, but you can't prove it was that bad, and we're just going to move along like nothing happened.
I do think there's been a somewhat subtle change with the unsealing of the search warrant. So Garland doing that so that it was available to the news media, now to anybody, all of us who want to see that. It did change the calculus. You had some Republicans step back. They're just over the top. Defense of Trump. I think it was the what's the conservative group in the House? Not the Republican Study Committee, but the
Freedom Caucus?
Freedom Caucus. They actually had a meeting scheduled for Friday, which they canceled after the search warrant was unsealed, which was going to be this big, vociferous defense of Trump. So you've started to see wrinkles in that, and some Republicans here and there who now have gone from this is outrageous to we need to wait and see and let all the facts come out. So there's been a subtle shift, I think, just based on the nature of seeing the search warrant and why they went in, that the concern here wasn't just over any documents. It was over specific classification of documents and a tip-off that some had to do with nuclear. The other thing, too, that we haven't touched upon is somebody tipped the FBI off. Somebody within Mar-a-Lago.
Trump thinks it was Melania. He has come out and said he thinks
did?
it was Kushner.
Oh, my gosh, I did see this. Yeah,
he has come out and said it's a distinct possibility that Melania or Kushner turned me in.
Wow. See, that's news that I missed. But it has to be someone who's close to him, who knows Mar-a-Lago from the inside, who would know where this stuff is retained and kept. So that's the other wrinkle to this, that it's somebody within Trump MAGA world who came to the FBI.
I just tried to remind people we are running the same tread we've run with Trump dozens of times while he was president. And the first question you have to ask yourself, I think, when you're on the Democratic side of this, when assessing what is this going to do to Trump politically, what does this mean for the Republican Party moving forward, and how are we going to capitalize it? The first thing is that you've had Trump in these exact same crosshairs a dozen times. You've never got him. There is no one kill shot that takes this man down, because the entire Republican Party, it's like the end scene in Ender's Game. There's so many layers around him of protection. No single shot is going to get through him. So you just said it. We're probably never going to know what these docs are. unless there is clear evidence of his intent to do something criminally with him, I don't think there's much to be made of this. Simple possession of those docs is not going to warrant them filing an indictment.
But I think there's a history there of failing to turn those over, and the fact that Trump's attorney signed off and said these were all the docs in his possession.
His attorney might be in trouble,
and we know now that wasn't the case. I don't know. I feel like this is less gray than trying to charge Trump with January 6th. Trying to stay in power, in terms of trying to find something to charge him with, this is much more cut and dry. So I do think if he's going to be charged with something and be held accountable, this seems to be much more like the line in the sand than what we've been looking at up until now.
Brendan, you've been around high-level professional politicians, congressmen, senators. You've worked on the staff of a senator. You've been around kind of people in this position. So politically, this is being described as a windfall for Trump, that this is because the FBI went through with this action, and it will be seen as so egregious and so horrible for Trump personally and for the country as a nation that everybody has closed ranks around Donald Trump. Even people that are obviously running for president, your Ted Cruz's, your Tim Scott, they're kind of holding their powder. But most people, the consensus has been, this has helped Trump in his bid for reelection. Mike Huckabee has gone as far as saying, call off the primary, give it to him now, let's start running. Brendan, how did Trump's political calculations change because of this? This is something the right's been banging on all week. I just don't see this.
I don't either. And so the refrain I keep hearing is this makes him much more likely that he's going to announce his candidacy before the midterms. But I felt like that was already fairly likely anyway from the noise we were hearing. So maybe it's been moved up to early October now instead of like days before the November election. I don't know. But I don't know that it has changed the calculus in terms of his support. In terms of his diehard supporters, it may have made them even more aggressively supportive of his bid to the point that they're going to be following much more closely than they would have. I think what remains to be seen is that those people who were on the margin, who voted for him last time but have been very ambivalent about him since then, the polling has shown that with the January 6th committee hearings, his support has softened among some of those marginal voters that were in his court. That is where I think we need more time to see how they react to this. I've seen only one poll that's been out since all this happened, where there's 49% of Americans believe that he's had and knew that he had documents that were classified and detrimental to our security. 37% think that this has been a sham and is bogus, and then you have 12 or 13% that are unsure. But I don't know. I think it takes the support that he had, and it just makes it much more zealous and much more aggressive. But I don't know that it's really going to change people from one side to the next. I think that's baked in.
I really didn't hear anybody's analysis that said that. Tell me why the serving of this warrant would make more suburban white moms vote for Trump. And I haven't heard anybody talk about. Everybody loves to talk about what Trump has gained, his gain in Hispanic, how he served with female voters, how he has increased his margins with African-American men.
Yeah.
Nobody talks about the 5% of white men that left him.
Yes.
And the 5% of white men that left him really don't like the January 6th committee and probably really don't like this. So other than the hardcore base, where is the political advantage at? I've heard no pundit explain it to me.
Well, I think the attempt to gain a political advantage is with that line of attack saying if this could happen to him, this could happen to you. But I don't see that resonating.
What does that mean?
Like what? I mean, I think most people understand and hear about search warrants being executed on a daily basis in their towns, their communities, their metropolitan areas. So it would presume to think that somehow people are oblivious to this, and this is the first time they've seen this occur ever, and I don't think that's the case. I think that's a very difficult leap to make. The way that I see it right now is the right is throwing every conceivable argument that they can against the wall to see what'll stick, because that's really the mode that they're in. It's a kind of like emergency danger mode, but I don't see that really working. I don't see that changing the calculus at all. If anything, the irony to all of this is it makes Trump a focal point for the midterms, which I really don't think Republicans want Trump to be the face of the midterms or this. They want to keep the conversation on the economy, on inflation, on gasoline. This does not help them. This moves the conversation to Trump front and center. Yeah. And that does not enable them to win suburban white women or moderate suburban voters.
Or those 5% of white men that left you that you've
the 5% of white
get
men
back in some way.
Especially if Trump decides to declare his candidacy and continues to make public statements and just suck out all the oxygen from the congressional races. That'll do them no good. In fact, we'll see it'll be in some ways similar to what we saw with the Georgia Senate races in the aftermath of the presidential election. That was the same dichotomy we had there, and we saw how those Senate races went. So I think it would matter less in House races, but I think it could matter in terms of the Senate races in terms of having the effect that Republicans don't want it to have.
Well, as somebody who is interested in campaigns, and Brandon is somebody who, like yourself, who's taken classes in them, it's going to be really interesting to watch how the Republicans take the defund the police message, which failed miserably for the Democrats.
Oh, yeah.
What kept us really from maximizing what we could have done in 2020. But apparently, your old team is going to pick that up and take a shot at it.
Yeah.
I'd be real interested. What is the Republican version of defund the FBI going to look like?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know. And I think that attempt has already been severely, I think, weakened by the attack on the FBI field office in Cincinnati. You had that come the day after all of this, where there was all of this anti-FBI sentiment espoused by Marjorie Taylor Greene and others. And then you actually have a guy who's armed to the tilt trying to, scale FBI satellite office who ends up getting shot down in the midst of all of the increased chatter and death threats against FBI agents. Like, that does not look good. And I think, again, if you're talking about, mainstream America and how they view that, they see that as this is an escalation of rhetoric. And again, coming from the Law and Order Party, how does the Law and Order Party justify that or rationalize that?
And 2024 is still going to be Trump is you and you are Trump. An attack on him is an attack on you. He's your cultural flag bearer.
Oh, I'm glad you mentioned that. So that was the other theme to all of this, is saying that this attack on him is an attack on the country. It's an attack on our nation.
Brad, who is that for? Other than just, is that still the rally crowd? Is that?
Well, I don't know who that's for, but it has shades of this authoritarian bent that the party has taken, because that's typically what you see in autocratic countries, where the leader gets associated with the country as a whole, and they're inseparable, whatever, and so the nationalism, the patriotism gets wrapped up solely in the leader and in nothing else. And the leader is everything. And it's not coincidence that, at this last CPAC in Florida, Viktor Orban, the autocratic-like leader of Hungary, was one of the keynote speakers, and was treated to resounding applause. Especially as he called out gay people and anybody that his government has fought against. So again, I think it's borrowing from the strongman autocrat playbook is what they're doing, and I noticed it immediately because I'm like, this is a real shift. This is a pivot, and it's very different from in the past when Republicans have felt like they're presidential candidates or presidents have been attacked or their leaders have been attacked. They have fought back and responded back, but they never attempted to make the claim. I mean, think back to even when George W. Bush was president during 9/11. There were no claims made that this was an attack against him as a person. No. And granted, that was different, but there wasn't this attempt to wrap him up as this supreme being and that he was the country. And that's where they've gone with Trump. And it's very weird and strange because it's foreign to us. And again, I can point to any number of countries in Central and South America and in Southeast Asia where this is more common, but this is not done in the United States.
After everything that man has done, the Republicans are still going to say, find yourself in Trump.
Yeah.
Look to Trump and find a reflection of yourself in this man. That just stuns me.
Remember, Trump himself was the one who said, "I alone can fix it." It's the idea that he alone is the only person who, can be their leader and do all of this. And I want to pivot back to the FBI. I found it extremely striking. If you remember during the summer, June of 2020, so in the aftermath of what happened with George Floyd and the rioting across the country, it was the Republicans who were taking Trump's side, saying that we should send in ATF, FBI agents, basically national law enforcement to all these cities in the country to take over basically duties, because under this guise that somehow local leaders weren't acting as aggressively enough to stamp out the rioting. And so Republicans supported the FBI then. Yeah, let's send them into cities and let's have them act as local police forces. So it's a complete 180 now. The FBI is somehow like, we need to defund them.
And how did we get here? I mean, I get it that the Steele dossier was a piece of campaign oppo research that went way too far, and too many people did too many political things with that.
Right.
I get that. I guess what I'm trying to say is if you're of the mind that Trump has been wronged by the FBI during his presidency, there are some points where you can make some arguments in that area that you wouldn't be completely wrong. That's a massive leap to this is a corrupt organization that needs to be ripped out root and branch and completely reimaginated under a Trump administration.
Yeah, well, and it fails to factor in that there's different FBI leadership now as well. Not only in terms of the Attorney General and DOJ, but in terms of the FBI itself. You have Christopher Wray, who is the leader, who was actually appointed by Trump originally. Yeah. So, I mean, this isn't the same as what, you saw at the beginning of the Trump administration, end of the Obama administration, Republicans pointing to that. So it's not valid from that standpoint even.
And I'm going to need somebody on Fox or OAN or some outlet to, again, what is the deep state? Is the fact that 3 people signed off on this and they followed rule of law, is that the representation of the deep state? What form how did the deep state execute this warrant? That's what I don't get either. I've heard a lot of this is the swamp. This is what Trump was there to drain. This is the worst of Washington. How? They asked for a warrant. They followed all the rules.
They went through all of the processes you need to go through.
They'd execute against anybody else.
Checked all the boxes.
Can you tell me how? Other than you just don't like politically, potentially what this is going to do to somebody that candidate you like. Where are we at? We made this massive leap that I thought we had gone past that. I didn't think we were going to immediately jump to that.
Which they did. And there's no logic in their arguments. And I guess the scary thing is, and you've seen several pundits espouse this, what comes to mind is Laura Ingraham, saying that if Trump takes the reins of the presidency again, it's the idea about firing everybody in the FBI who is a part of this, about getting rid of anybody who has a modicum of independence, and really just installing loyalists to Trump. Now, this is kind of similar to that Section 1... blanking out the name, that order that Trump had bandied about at the end of his last term, which would have given him permission to replace career bureaucrats with political appointees. Right, across all agencies. But they've kind of taken a step further, saying anybody who isn't loyal from Trump needs to be cleaned out of the ranks of the FBI and replaced, and go on this mission of grievance against all of these institutions for what they've done to Trump. So it will be this hollowing out of government, so that anybody who played any kind of role in what happened is just fired and is no longer part of the government, essentially.
I saw a United States senator this week go on TV and accuse the FBI of planting evidence against the former president with absolutely no evidence of that at all.
Was this Cruz?
Oh, this is Rand Paul.
Oh.
I'm sure Cruz did it too.
Yeah.
But Rand Paul pulled that one off. Like I said, I've seen a former governor and former presidential candidate call for the ending of the primary system to appoint Trump as their nominee and just
which
throw
is
off
insane.
just throw off the entire democratic process. I mean, just the lunacy that people have acted with this week. And I think this week, I have always thought Ron DeSantis is not running for president. He's not running for president because what's the point? If he just waits 4 years, Trump is completely gone. He is out of the way. And the best thing that DeSantis is making the calculation that the party, Trump will destroy the party one way or the other. And he's going to do it in the next 2 to 3 years. If he happens to get himself elected president again, the Republican Party will be destroyed by his next presidency. There will be nothing left to it. And there's a very good chance the Republicans will destroy themselves anyway. Just let them play out their hand. If I'm DeSantis, I always have thought DeSantis' strategy is let this fever break, and when it does, everybody in the party will become begging me to put it back together. I'll just wait. And by the side, what's DeSantis, 55, let's say?
Yeah.
He's got another 40 goddamn years to run, I guess, so time is on his side.
And he has another 4 years as governor, assuming he wins the governor's race this fall.
Ron DeSantis sent out, he was the first Republican politician I saw that made a tweet.
And very inflammatory tweet.
It was basically, this was all planted, this is tyranny, this is a banana republic, burn the DOJ down. Brendan, I'm applying old school political rules here. To me, that is not the tweet of a man running for president. Am I just missing this here?
Well, I wondered that at first, but at the same time, I also thought, I mean, have we really jumped the shark at this point? So maybe, again, I think that we could also just be in new territory where none of the old rules apply.
So you're telling me Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley are more disciplined presidential candidates already than Ron DeSantis?
I think in some ways, yes. I think that Ron DeSantis has this posture he's been trying to strike in terms of going to Trump's right to differentiate himself from Trump and saying Trump isn't MAGA enough. I'm more MAGA than Trump. But then he also has to stay in the good graces of Trump's supporters and not anger Trump too much because he needs that same audience to propel him to the presidency. And so this was kind of the perfect opening for him to insert himself into that mix and really rile up Trump's MAGA base and curry favor with them because he needs them ultimately.
No, none of the senators, all of them held their fire. Nobody put a tweet out that wasn't, hey, we need to look at evidence. We need to make sure things are happening, at least in the first 24 hours after the raid. They were pretty succinct in their response and pretty traditional. DeSantis was the only one who broke with that and really came out hard.
Yeah, and I had to pull up DeSantis' tweet just to remind myself.
It's classic.
So he talks about the escalation of the weaponization of federal agencies against the regime's political opponents. He uses the word regime to describe the Biden administration with a capital R twice in the tweet, which, again, is inflammatory. And then also ends by saying banana republic.
Yeah.
So those are two very distinct ways of describing the situation that were very unique to him and garnered a lot of attention. And it's also, I think, very dangerous because it's also somehow saying that the Biden administration is not the legitimate administration, presidential administration, government of this country, if you're referring to it as a regime. And so I think that speaks to the whole election denier thing for those that, refuse to accept Biden as president. But it also speaks to this idea to somehow cast Biden as directly involved in what the DOJ is doing and FBI, and basically say that the administration is comparable to a autocratic government in a third world country, which is where you get the whole banana republic. I mean, it's so multiple layers to unravel there, but I also think that there's a lot packed into that tweet and a lot of different constituencies that he's reaching out to with it.
Chuck Grassley, he decided not to jump on this bandwagon this week. Just for anybody to know, Chuck Grassley, the 88-year-old senator from Iowa who's running for re-election.
Yeah, well, is he 88? I know he'll be
86.
No, he'll be 91 when he gets re-elected, I believe.
Jesus. I just want to say that again as a point of rage for anybody who might be listening to my voice. The 88-ish-year-old senator from Iowa.
You're right. He's 88.
Who's running for re-election for a 6-year term.
And so he would be 94 at the end of this next 6-year term.
He decided he didn't want to jump on the Trump raid this week.
No, he jumped on another bandwagon.
He went after the IRS because it must have been just for Republicans.
Crazy.
Let's just list off every federal agency that we want to tank, put the people that work for them in jeopardy, and basically just create a complete shitstorm. So in the Inflation Reduction Bill, it's hard for me even to say Inflation Reduction Bill. That name is so ridiculous. There's an expansion of the IRS staff for auditing. It's an expansion of about 87,000. Again, I'm assuming that's the max that they can hire. And the specific goal is they're going to start auditing more high-end individuals. Chuck Grassley, and I believe I have this correct, referred to that as a private federal army. That is not what that...
These are not enforcement agents.
No.
And actually, the text includes, it's for auditing. It also includes IT staffing within the agency. It includes a wide array of different job functions. And they have gone immediately with this very false and misleading claim that 87,000 enforcement agents are going to be sent out after people. And Chuck Grassley, said that these guys would be armed with guns. They're going to be coming knocking on your door.
Then he talked about how much ammo they're buying and how armed these people are. That is absolute. That is so irresponsible. And for what's left for Chuck Grassley? What's left? Why?
He's been in the Senate since the early 70s.
That's what I'm saying. What's the point? Grassley has one thing left to do. Pass away. I'm sorry to say, why is he there? So this 88-year-old dude who's been there since the 70s just basically got up and said the IRS has been turned into the president's private army. They're armed to the teeth, and they're coming to you. Right after, some other jackass just told everybody the DOJ and FBI had been weaponized, and what happened to President Trump was illegal and was going to happen to them.
And this was after the FBI field office had been attacked. So we see the direct consequences of this rhetoric.
Brandon, what's the future of the FBI? Let's game this out. What happens if a Republican, any Republican, takes the presidency in 2024? What happens to the FBI?
I think there's going to be an attempt to completely just wipe the agency clean of any expertise and talent. There's going to be this attempt to put in loyalist, political yes men and women who are going to be politically aligned with the party and the administration. There's a lot to be said. It really depends upon the level of crazy and also the pushback by Congress and who has control of both branches of Congress. But all you have to do is listen to what they're saying now. And again, it's a 180 from what they were saying about the FBI just, 2 years ago. And so now we're here. But it makes me very fearful because the FBI, there have been a lot of reforms, particularly since Watergate, especially to make the FBI and DOJ more independent, and that's why you have a 10-year term for FBI director, which you didn't have before.
Has the FBI director ever been fired? I'm assuming one has, but it's a pretty political process to get an FBI director run out.
Yeah, it is, and it's very difficult. I don't know that one has been fired. That's a very good question. I don't know. Because, there's the most controversial FBI director was Hoover, and he served for, 40, 50 years?
He kind of made the place, so he just kind of did whatever he wanted.
Well, and a lot of presidents were afraid of him. So,
no one was going to go in
no
and
one
tell
wanted
him
to cross
no.
him.
Yeah.
But partially because of what happened with Hoover is there is this 10-year term so that you would be able to have an FBI director serve indefinitely like that. But there's a lot of checks and balances in the system now. There's this whole attempt, and the FBI had actually built up this profile of being a fairly kind of independent, heads-down organization, and all of that now seems to be crumbling with the Republicans attempting to dismantle that image completely. It's really fascinating to me, and that's why one person who I haven't heard speak out, which I would really be interested to see what he has to say, is Bill Barr, with all of this going on.
Why would you be interested in what Bill Barr would have to say?
Well, only because this was a guy who is an agency guy who believes very strongly in the centralized power of DOJ and FBI, and it would be interesting to me how he would either spin this or attempt to deflect. I would just be curious. On that aim.
I thought you were going like a positive that here from Bill Barr. You're just interested in what spin he's going to put on it.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
because again, he is one of those who I think has spoken out of both sides of his mouth, obviously.
Constantly.
And so I would just be curious, like, how does he, if he's put on a hot seat and he gets intense question over this, how does he play himself? I mean, how does he just try to, spin the entire situation? I would just be curious to see, because I mean, he was there, he knew the players.
On the way over, I was thinking that are we getting ready to move into a period that looks more like the 1960s, more civil unrest, no trust in institutions, and a culture that is changing and is going to change. There's no way coming out of the 50s that you knew that was going to hold. Something culturally, major cultural changes was going to happen. It feels like we're kind of lining ourselves up for a repeat of that decade in those types of areas. Big cultural change, big political change, economic change. And when we get out of this decade, everything's going to look different. The thing that I was thinking about is the things that fueled that type of change and protest in the 60s were civil rights for African Americans, women, LGBTQ, and the end of the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
Those are two pretty American things. Saying, hey, this war is not where we need to be. We should not be building this type of, if you want to call it colony or whatever you want to say, whatever we were doing in Central Asia, it was a civil war. Let's back out. We're done. There's a history of talking out and standing up in civil unrest against unpopular wars in this country and every country that's ever existed.
Right. It's just like there is for the fight for equality and expansion of civil rights.
The fight for equality was we need to make the Constitution full. We need to take those rights and extend them to the people that have historically been denied, and we need to live up to the promise of the Constitution. Right. That was a pretty American thing. And there's lots of people that did horrible things in pursuit of those two goals. If we're going through a period of civil and political and social unrest now, what's really driving this? I really couldn't tell you. What really is happening? What is the underlying condition that's pushing all of this forward? In the 60s, you had these big things you could point to and say, yeah, I get how an unpopular foreign war is going to drive political and social change. I get it how people, standing up for their rights is going to drive it. What's driving this now, and driving it to what? Where are we going with this? And who's driving? This can't be all about Trump still. This has to be about grievance and change and people being left behind and things like that. But are we just going to continue to let the negativity of those issues be what propels this forward? And it looks like until Trump leaves the Republican Party or the Republican Party throws him out, at least on a political scale, I don't see where it doesn't feel like there's anything positive driving all of this change. Like in the 60s, at least the goals were lofty.
Right. What's
the goal now? To elect Trump as a Viktor Orban style dictator? To tear down the FBI? What is the goal?
Well, and I think so the Trump cult of personality is just one symptom or one factor of a greater issue, which I think is that we've become a nation of nations. So there's been a lot of good articles about this, but the fact that we have multiple nations now within our country, and whereas before we have had polarization that has increased, now that polarization is defined by geographical boundaries. You have, we've had the last 5 presidential elections have been decided under 55% of the vote, which is a departure from, the 30 years before
when
that.
Reagan won every state except one.
Right. Or you go back to LBJ. I mean, both sides. And then you also have this dynamic now where it almost never happens. I remember writing my undergrad political science thesis on split ticket voting. So voters that vote for president on one ballot, one party, and then their member of Congress on another from another party. That hardly ever happens anymore. We're at a state of play now where nobody split ticket votes anymore. We used to have plenty of split ticket outcomes across states in the country going back presidential elections. That's unheard of. That doesn't happen anymore. And states have become extremely polarized, and it leads to this increase in talk. And so I don't think it's accidental that you have Texas passing their GOP passing this succession, resolution, or you have Arizona on the eve of the Trump raid. You had the candidate for governor, the Republican candidate for governor of Arizona, Kari Lake, supporting succession on behalf of Arizona. Yeah. And so this is being thrown out more and more by the Republican Party's leading candidates for office. So it gets us to a point of, I couldn't imagine like there being a fracture or war or a civil war or something akin to that. But when you have enough people that keep talking about it, that keep talking about having their state succeed, at some point you have to ask, like, how serious is this? And even if they are not serious, there are people who listen to them who are serious and will take it seriously.
Yeah. I was listening to something that Charlie Kirk did over the summer when that guy stood up at I think it was a college speech and asked, when do we start shooting people?
Oh, yeah.
You keep talking about what we have to do. When is it time to start being violent? And I think there's a lot of people that are getting dangerously close to that
level, yeah,
to that line.
And you notice that he was very careful in how he responded to that.
Oh yeah, Charlie Kirk's an idiot.
He didn't just shoot it down as out of bounds. I mean, he was very gingerly in how he danced around that.
What's the next step in this process? What's the next shoe that drops as it pertains to this raid? You have Andy McCarthy out there, who I really like. Listen to every week. He's a great resource.
National Review.
For conservative political and legal issues. He is still pushing. This was all a pretext just to raid Trump's house for January 6th. I think that's horribly irresponsible. But where does this go? Are they arrest warrant next?
Well, I mean, I don't think that they're doing this if they're not going to bring charges, because I think, again, notwithstanding the hyperbole by the right, like, this is significant, though, to have a former president a search warrant. We've never had that in our history. And you don't get to this point unless those that are doing it have very credible intelligence and evidence that this is so egregious that it warrants taking this step and going full board in terms of actually bringing charges against the former president. So I don't see how you don't do that if you are willing to take this step to begin with. Yeah. And then taking the unprecedented step of unsealing the warrant, which I think had to be done at that point, but taking that step as well. So the trajectory of this, I think, is we get to charges. The question is when, because we all know, too, that these investigations can drag out and it can be a long lapse of time before you actually get an indictment.
No, I bet that indictment's going to come around sometime around October 15th.
Oh, October surprise.
Puts us right in the middle of the October surprise season for the old midterm arrears.
Man, that's going to be crazy.
That would be. I agree. You don't take this step unless you know eventually you're going to charge.
Yeah,
and maybe that's why some of the responses got so loony, so crazy, is that they know that, hey, this is step one. And I heard somebody explaining that there's like a 99% if a warrant is raided that charges follow. It's the logical next step because you've already identified the crime. You think there's evidence there. Right. Now you're going to confirm that by gathering the evidence. So it feels like there's a charge coming next. And that's I don't know where we're going to be at that point.
Yeah, no, it does. And I think, and again, if we think that the reaction is crazy now, just wait.
Maybe, yeah. There's no good way to it. I'm like, maybe there's some benefit in getting some of the crazy out now, but no, it's going to be a shit.
And I do think we have to be prepared as this process moves forward that there are going to be increasing numbers of sporadic violent incidents that happen, like the one we saw last week. That those are going to become more frequent, and many of them will be lone wolf perpetrators like that man. But this is going to become more and more frequent. And again, it points to the just inherent irresponsibility by the right-wing echo chamber, because these people are radicalized, not unlike the radicalization we saw during the early to mid-2000s with Al-Qaeda and with ISIS over online. The web has an ability to really radicalize people across different ideologies, and we're seeing that play out now. And with the far right and with the Trump personality cult.
Well, there's a guy today who I think at like 4 a.m. crashed his car into a barricade around the Capitol.
Yeah, I haven't read that story yet.
And then
That's just
killed
happened.
himself when the cops approached him. So there's no evidence that was linked to this, but
we'll
it's not a
know
far
soon
leap.
enough. Yeah, you never know.
Salman Rushdie got stabbed at a speech he was giving, I believe it was at a university inside New York City.
Yes, yeah.
That made me more sad than I thought it would make.
This is somebody who's had a fatwa, a religious
No.
edict for his death out on him from Iran for decades, I think going back to the 80s. And he had to flee Iran. He has lived in the U.S. and Europe since then. He is a scholar, an academic. So he wrote a book called The Satanic Verses, which was highly critical of the Prophet Muhammad and the Quran. And so he has faced numerous death threats and assassination attempts throughout his life. And so it's astonishing you get to this point in this day and age where he's given a speech and he's rushed by this 25-year-old radical who stabbed him multiple times in the neck. And I think he just was able to get off a ventilator, but he's going to have this long road to recovery. I think is going to lose his eye. And there was no security at the event either. It's not like they had metal detectors or anything like that. It was literally just walk in.
And I'd read that a translator of his book has been killed.
Oh, more than one. So you have the Japanese translator who actually was the narrator for the audiobook version who was killed. You have the Norwegian publisher who was killed. You have an Italian publisher of the book who was killed. So multiple people connected with the book's translations into multiple languages have been either killed or attacked.
The Iranians on Iranian state TV celebrated this, saw this as a good thing, that this was an example of punishment delayed but punishment delivered. What gets me is I understand that the Democrats sometimes have a hard time understanding the concept that you have to take the world as it is. And sometimes you got to do things with bad people that you don't want to do, but that's just the way it is. And it seems like we've taken that approach with Iran and in some ways much of the Middle East.
Yeah.
And that... while the week that Salman Rushdie is attacked on stage, the Biden administration is openly talking to Iran about getting back into the JPO, ASC, whatever the Iran deal was, and bringing the Iranians back into the international community. I generally support that, but God, it just sucks when it's like, really?
Well, I know we just don't have any options.
We have because we just don't have a whole lot of options.
Just like Saudi Arabia with MBS. I mean, we know that he murders many people, let alone that Khashoggi, the New York Times reporter. But it's this realist idea that we just don't. We have very few options, and so it's either engage or don't engage, and there's ramifications from not engaging.
And there are parts culturally in the world that are extremely different than us, and we have to either accept that and accept what that means and move on, or don't do business with these people.
Right.
I doubt anything changes. I doubt this attack on him changes anything with our relationship with Iran. But it's just another indicator that there are times when you've got to do things with allies that you don't want, but you really don't have an option.
That are extremely unpleasant or anathema to our values.
Yeah. I mean, I'll rephrase. We could do something about this. Do you want gas to be $7 a gallon? That's just the only thing you have to do. We could stop messing with this tomorrow if we wanted to. We just have to be able to say we'll deal with the economic fallout of changing our relationship with the Middle East. And as we've just seen by gas prices, no one's gonna vote for that.
No.
What are you paying for gas these days?
I think I last filled up at $3.49, $3.40, something around there.
I filled up the car, the truck the other day, and it was like $56, and it's like that's the first time that's been out of the the 60s, 70s, and 80s in quite some time. Is there a gas prices escalated quickly, made people mad very quickly?
Right.
Does it work in the opposite direction? Is there an opportunity for Biden and the Dems to, as gas prices fall, to quickly turn that into positive political feelings as we really get into midterm season?
I think so, as the downturn continues. We all know that gas prices never de-escalate as fast as they rise, though. It tends to be slower. So I think we have a little ways to go before you can really tout that success. But I think you'll be able to. There's also silver linings with the economy in terms of employment still. So, despite we're in this weird area with inflation being extremely high and you have some sectors of the economy bracing or thinking there's a recession pretty closely ahead, the employment picture doesn't seem to point to that at all. And I keep telling people the reason that none of these economic indicators are lining up is you have to remember that we had this completely artificial and arbitrary reduction in the economy caused by COVID. Like, that was not a normal economic downturn. That was artificially the government coming in and saying, we are going to basically just tighten the economy. We're going to reduce output. And so because that was not normal and there wasn't any normal way that really unfolds, we were in this just elongated process of decoupling from that. And we're going to see these weird indicators that really don't line up because, that was non-traditional and not standard economics. And so getting out of that is going to be very untraditional as well. Unconventional, I should say. And so I think you can't lose sight of that. So I think it's not very surprising that we see all these sometimes indicators that are pointing in opposite directions, positive and negative at the same time, because, what happened, we had never taken action that was like that. I mean, it was unprecedented, with COVID. There's been times that we have, done rate hikes or dropped the interest rate, taken response, for example, the Great Recession. But when you retract the entire national economy all at once due to a virus, there's just no way to calculate what that impact is going to be years down the road. And
your two main supplier of goods, China and India, keep coming and going offline over a 12 to 14 month period.
And China continues to have draconian lockdowns every time they have a COVID outbreak.
Because they don't have a vaccine that works and they won't use anybody else's.
That's exactly right.
I think inflation is naturally going to fall, but before the Democrats get too excited about how we're going to weave this tale into midterm magic, did you see Biden try to explain inflation for the month of July when he said it was zero? And people, this is my point. In order to turn the dropping inflation, which is naturally going to happen, like you talked about, as more things come online and stay online, the natural byproduct of that will be prices start to fall.
Yeah.
Point to me on the Democratic side who can come up with a coherent political midterm communication strategy around that accurately tells people what's happening, what our role was, and turns it into positive feeling.
We're all waiting.
Good luck.
Yeah.
There's no way. So we'll get some residual bump off of it, but that would require us showing political skill, and that we've been down that road too many times to think the Democrats can make big hay off that. So who knows?
Agreed.
It's time for the fun time, Brandon. Did you do anything fun? Have you done anything fun this week? Just hiding out in the house because it's so damn hot here?
Yeah, no, it is very hot. So no, I've done a lot this weekend. So I was traveling for work this last week and got back Friday evening from Ohio.
How's work travel going? Is it
pretty good?
Does it feel back to normal-ish, or is it?
It
still
does.
on?
Yeah. the planes are crowded and seats are taken. It does. The airports feel like back to normal. And so we're in this area, area now where the airlines are trying to catch up. There's staffing shortages, and my flight back was delayed 20 minutes getting off the tarmac because we didn't have a pilot or a co-pilot. Jeez. And so they brought a pilot and co-pilot who had their day off from PTO in to be able to fly our plane.
How are we making pilots? That's a great question. I just assumed all pilots came from the military. I don't think that's correct.
No, I mean,
but how are we replacing people that are retiring as commercial airline pilots?
Well, I mean, they're finally trying to ramp that up, but I mean, of course, that takes years. So, we're years behind. But part of the problem was it was so misguided. But during the pandemic, and again, I'm going back, the contraction of the economy and everything that led to was artificial. We knew it was temporary. We knew that it was a one-time, but everything was going to come back. This wasn't going to be the new normal forever. But yet you had airlines that took that opportunity to offer early retirement and buyouts to many pilots.
Very short-sighted.
So you had this unheard of massive number of pilots that took early retirement, and so down to an all-time low of actual pilots, and so now they're hurting because they offered all those pilots early retirement, which was a huge mistake.
Yeah, and you can't. There's no quick fix to that.
No,
that has to work itself out over time. So we've traveled a couple times this summer, and it's been decent, but I don't know.
I feel lucky because I know many others that have had like horror stories about delays and then not being able to get on flights for multiple days after that, and having to completely reschedule other plans that they had.
When the early to mid 90s, when we worked together, business travel was fun. Business travel was considered kind of a perk at that point. Now I can't. I mean, everybody it's just like, oh, good God, you got to be kidding me. That I got to go back.
Yeah.
I've got a couple friends that are dealing with the going back into the office a couple days a week.
Oh,
just
okay.
starting that now, and there's still a
little back to that,
little adjustment back to it. So, but it's still amazing that how many people have their day-to-day lives still impacted by COVID.
Oh, completely.
We all do.
I mean, even the client on site that I went to in Columbus, it's large office buildings that are mostly vacant still. So I mean, you could hear crickets. They're very quiet because the only time employees are there is if they choose to have meetings in person with other teams there, or they have a reason and they call another employee up and let's go and get together in front of a whiteboard and do this. And so it's a very weird dynamic because you have these huge office buildings that are full of people.
When does that all stop? When does the person just come in and say, "Hey, guess what? Everyone's back in the space we're paying for"? I mean, eventually, over the next couple of years, that's going to happen.
Oh, that everybody comes back? Well, I don't think so.
Well, because the company is like, again, this was a forced change that happened spontaneously 2.5 years ago.
Well,
we've made adjustments to it, but this organization doesn't run remotely.
Well, but the problem is there are enough organizations now that have gone to a full permanent remote status or one that allows for that. So the competition is as such that companies can go back to being fully on site, but they're going to lose people. And so they have to just somehow be able to balance that they might have somewhat of a brain drain depending on what the positions are with that. Because I don't think there's ever going to be a full go back. If anything, I think we're going to be in this new normal where there's going to be more hybrid work where it's, you can have a couple days off and then you work a few days in the office. But there's going to be, I think, much more flexibility than we had before just based on what we saw in the pandemic. I think that's going to be one of the great changes to work culture that is going to last.
It's going to be really interesting in like 2030, 2035 when studies start coming out with some years behind them to really kind of understand how that impacted work and what COVID's final impact was.
There's a big effort right now among some companies to go to a 4-day work week. There was this article in the Wall Street Journal about that and another one in Forbes. And there's been a few big companies that have done that.
Yeah.
And so that's the big talk right now in many circles is a cultural shift.
How does that work if you're a non-hourly employee? I mean, work hours are whatever your boss decides they are, really. I mean, I don't get that. 4-day work week, that's irrelevant. If it's a Friday at 3:00 and I need something, I'm calling you. Just like what I'm saying is my history of work has been when something needed to get done, I had to do it regardless of what day it was or the time of the week. Are we saying that that's changed and we're only doing business from 8 to 5 Monday through Thursday? I'm all in on that. I think that's a fantastic idea, but I don't think that's what a 4-day work week means.
That's a good question. I'd have to read more deeply into some of the intent behind it. Yeah,
I keep wanting to ask people, so what you saying is you're going to stop emailing me at 8 p.m. and expecting a response. Is that what you're – because that's very different than saying we're shifting to a 4. So what are we actually saying? That's what I can't – that's what I can't get a beat on.
I do know a lot of companies have already gone the softer pivot to just canceling all meetings on Fridays, making sure that employees' calendars are free for meetings,
Yeah.
that there isn't any, major, request or big things going on, to make the Friday be more of a transition into the weekend, so that you're not, just have a, packed schedule of all these
Yeah.
different things that you have to do and meetings you have to attend. So that seems to has become more standard, is just making Fridays lighter in terms
Yeah.
of work.
I'm all for a 4-day work week. Most people I talk to that say, I really enjoy working from home. It gives me a lot more flexibility. But I always ask them, do you work less? Are you less stressed?
Right.
Are you more happy with your job? Are you more satisfied with what you're doing? A lot of times those answers get different. Those questions get different answers. So
Yeah, those are really the questions that need to be asked.
All right, that's our hour. Thanks, Brandon.
Thanks, Craig.
Thanks for listening to 2 Men in the Middle. Make sure to give us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. Check out our website at 2meninthemiddle.com. Drop us an email at 2meninthemiddle@gmail.com or tweet at us at 2 Men in the Middle. We'll see you next week.